or not. Okay.
Good morning. Hemshech Ayin Beis, volume 3. We're in the middle of page 1248. Aleph Resh Mem Ches. The pages can be found if you want to follow along the text at ayinbeis.com. And I should also say this program is done live on Zoom and YouTube every morning at 9:30 a.m. Eastern Time, Sundays at 10 a.m. And then you can find it on the YouTube channel, ChassidusSupply.com, as well as if you want to sign up to our group, we have a WhatsApp Ayin Beis group where we post the daily audio, as well as any other comments or schedule changes, etc., etc., etc. Okay. Just a few announcements. Where are we at? We're at these highest levels of the maturity of the emotions, of the nefesh elokis, of the divine soul serving God, where the emotions have reached a point where a person cannot live without, b'chol moedecha, to the point of kleis hanefesh, that his whole soul, his whole being, is consumed like in a fire, like he explained. Not just a thirst, the lower level of b'chol moedecha, but also chelis ava, and most of all, kleis hanefesh, completely consumed with godliness, and that in turn affects the mind, that now you think completely different ideas and generate all kinds of different innovation when something is negei benafshe, negei le benafshe, his very life is dependent on it. So the emotions are are elevating bina to the level of chachma, and both of them are gazing at arich and atik within it, and that in turn draws down Gadlus Abba, the maturity of this recognition of a higher reality, into the midas, which he called ibur sheni, that the primis kavana primis shebemeich begili gam belev, that the inner kavana primis, that the mind, the chachma carries, and the moyach carries, should be revealed also in the level of the emotions of zah. And Yeshleimer, he said, we learned yesterday, that the halachas, hatera, which generally have a revealed reason, which is moyach shayachim elamidis, reach a higher level of Gadlus that you can also recognize and see that radiates the seid and primius, the inner hidden and inner dimensions within, like Rabbi, who is able to see in halacha gashmis, in a very practical, tangible, concrete law, halacha Torah, as seid aprimi kamei b'Torah shalamayla. Its inner secret, its hidden elements as the Torah is above in the higher levels. And how did he achieve that? Through the Avodah of b'chol moedecha, which is called b'chat katirnes katarna, his total consumption, totally being absorbed into elokus, himshel b'chinas meichin de Gadlus b'Torah. That we learned. Then I gave an introduction yesterday, which now I want to continue in learning inside. And all this doesn't just affect meichin and midas, but also affects the lower levels now, what we call Malchus, because till now we haven't talked about Malchus. And I'm going to talk about in a moment in the Shamas Chadashes, we spoke about the new souls that are created through the Zivug Shlim, the Zivug, the complete union. And he says now, Ukashem Sham Shachi Bezah, I'm continuing. This is a middle of page, a little down, a little more than halfway down, 1248, the line begins, B'chinas meichin de Gadlus b'Torah. Rabbi draws that, so he says, now he continues. This is like almost a new, it's not a new subject, but he's going back. So we said that Mochin, the Gadlus of Mochin, Bina is elevated to the stature of Chachma all the way upward. And so Mochin is being drawn into the Midas. That means the Midas are not just children being protected by a higher level of comprehension, but they are becoming Midas that are saturated with this higher level of awareness of Mochin the Gadlus, of Gadlus Abba. He says, like he said a few lines earlier, just as the Gadlus, he said, that the Hamshacha of Gadlus Abba is from the Midas Zah, should be radiate Mochin the Abba, just as the Hamshacha the transmission is in Zoyer Ampin, not from that higher level. So too, Mochin the Gadlus also is drawn into the level of Malchus, not just the level of Zah. And now he goes back to the concept of Neshamas Chadashis. Let's read it inside, then I'll explain. Ukiyadua, what Malchus means here. As it's known, the Yichud Pnimi Da'ava, the Yichud Pnimi of Chacham and Bina, this Kiyadua was the beginning of the discussion back on page, I discussed this at page 1236, which is why I read there, yesterday I read from there for this reason. So he says, it's known that the Yichud Pnimi of Abba V'Ima Hu Lahelid Neshamas Chadashis is to give birth to new energy, the new souls. And that happens through the Yichud of Zun, which is Hamshacha Atzmis, that actually gives birth to something new, not just something that reveals a concealed state. Now, here comes the obvious question. Who's giving birth exactly? Is it Chacham and Bina, the Yichud Pnimi of Chacham and Bina, that gives birth to Neshamas Chadashah, or is the Yichud between Zah and Malchus? He doesn't explicitly say which one it is. He seems to say both. So let's discuss that for a moment now. I'm going back to page 1236. I just want to see how he phrased it there. One second. Okay, it's not 100%. Let me see one more. Okay, the words he uses there, which may explain this idea, I'm looking at page 1236. The Rebbe Rashab says like this. This is the 6th line in the new paragraph on page 1236. He says, Ayin Beis, that Eitz Chaim writes in Shar Zivugim chapter 2, that when there's the Yichud of Chacham and Bina, of Abba Ve'ima, the father and mother, who beginners Zivuga Shlim, it's a full, complete union. Os Kol Iker Mitzias Azivug, then all the Kol Iker, which means the main primary element. Kol Iker is an interesting expression. It means all of it, but Kol Iker, the primary, Mitzias Azivug, who loses Mochin Gemurim, is to give complete Mochin, the complete level of Mochin, because it's not just Chitzenius Bina, it's not just the outer dimension of comprehension, but it's the full experience of Mochin, the Gadlus, in a level of maturity, El Zun. It gives it to Zah and Malchus, that Atzilus Lahilid Neshamas Chadashis. In order to give birth to Neshamas Chadashis. From this, it appears that the real birth happens through Zah and Malchus. But in order for it to really be complete and be a Neshama Chadasha, you need that the Mochin Gemurim have to have a total union, a complete union of Chacham and Bina. Now, this is something I never really, be honest, I never really looked into. And I don't remember Chassidus talking about it explicitly. It may have, it just may have, maybe I never paid attention enough. But here's the question. On one hand, we say Chacham and Bina is the father and mother. We call it Abba Ve'ima. On the other hand, we say Zah and Malchus. We know Zah is Zachar, is the male, and Malchus is the female. As a matter of fact, Malchus is where things give birth. Malchus is the womb of the female, that Zah provides the seed, Malchus provides the womb and what a mother provides, and that gives birth to the neshamas that will be created from that. So which one is it? And how does it work exactly? Even though you don't call Zah and Malchus Abba Ve'ima, you call Abba Ve'ima Chacham and Bina. So my thinking right now is the following. Now I'm going a little on a limb here because, as I said, I haven't seen this explicit. And if somebody has seen something about this, by all means, please share it with me. I go back to Tanya Perek Gimel. So what does he say in Tanya Perek Gimel? after finishing what he says in Ayin Beis about a neshama that is rooted in the deepest levels of Elikus, chelik elikam and mal mamish, that comes through chachmas, like bonim atem l'Hashem elokeichem, like a child that comes from the very core, essential genetic material of its parent, of its father. So in Ayin Beis, he starts talking about how it turns into the faculties, and he says, Abba ve'imas chachma bina, that when you want to give birth to emotions, you need to have chachma, bina, and das. Chachma provides the kernel of the idea. Koyachma, bina. I'm saying Peirik Gimel. I just said that. So he says. So he says, and Ima Bina provides the expansion and development of that kernel. Das is the iskashrus and the bonding, like we learned, the intimacy that ultimately creates the ability for Chachma and Bina to come together to give birth to what? To emotions. That's what he talks about there. So there's the birthing of emotions. Now, emotions are compared to children. We said, Eim levetzes ala afrechem is compared to offspring. But for the birth of neshamas, the real birth of a child, it's not just Mochin and midas. You need also to have an actual child is born. In the case from Atzilus, should be created bria, in this case, neshamas chadoshes. So what he's saying is that in order for there to be a complete union of Zoh and Malchus in the fullest sense of the word, that they can create something new, a neshama chadasha, you need to have that the Abba ve'ima in the Mochin of Chachma and Bina have to be joined together in the fullest sense of the word. In other words, the father and mother in Mochin, in turn, inform the father and mother in Zoh and Malchus. That's what it looks like he's saying. And that's what creates the neshamas chadashes. So in Avodah, you would say, for example, the Mochin is eizbananus. You contemplate on godliness, like he says in Tanya there. That in turn awakens, as he said, a yira b'moyach, pachad belev, ava belev. It awakens emotions. So you have something born called emotions. But you can't say there's a practical outside of the human being, nothing was created. It didn't come into any form of a creation like a child. There's no product. In other words, the product is the emotions, but the emotions are still all within the human being. So it's like a birth within you through your Mochin. If you want to have an effect on the world around you, you need to give birth to a child. In other words, there has to be some pu'ula, some action that affects outside of you. And that's the birth of neshamas chadashes. That it's not just within Atzilus. So within Atzilus, Mochin give birth to midas. The midas slowly grow and develop. Bina takes care of them. Then they come to a point where Chachma and Bina are, the midas elevate Bina back to the level of Chachma. They're now in a total union, receiving from the highest levels of Elikus, but you want it to affect the world around you, not just within you. And that is the creation of Bria. It doesn't say clearly the word Bria, but he says Neshamas Chadashes. So to use the words in Aleph Reish Lamed Vav, just to look at the letter, this is what he says. He says these words. The loses Mochin lezun. In other words, zun, the Zachar and Nekeva of Zoh and Malchus need Mochin. They need the concentration of the father and mother within you. So to maybe spell it out even further, maybe it works like this. We know that parents, in order to come together to give birth, needs a few things here. They can't just create a child. They need to, Api Halacha especially, need to be engaged with each other. Shulchan Aruch says that they have to feel affection toward each other. They have to speak affectionately toward each other. So notice, before there's the actual physical act of intimacy, they need to also be aligned with each other psychologically and emotionally and spiritually. That's Chachma and Bina, that the mind is completely united, the two minds. It's not, when the mother is busy with her children, she can't really be, her mind can't be completely united with her husband, with the father. But now Zivuk Shalom, that meaning Shlim, that means that they're completely bonded with each other in mind and heart, both Mochin and Midas. Now they can physically come together, and perhaps Zachar and Nekeva, which is Zoh and Malchus, is now the actual physical part of the union. So there's the intellectual or spiritual part of the union that informs, that gives that Mochin into Zoh and Malchus in order to give birth to new neshamas. So that, I think, really helps explain that point. And that's what he's saying here, that ultimately this union, just as it in Nimshach and Zoh, in the Midas, that it should be on the level of the union, not the chitzenius of being, not just the mother as it associates and descends on a lower level to its young, to its Midas, but it's on the level that you have Gadlus, Mochin the Gadlus, so too it's Nimshach and Malchus. To the point that the Yichud Primi Dava informs and gives that Mochin into Zoh and Malchus to give birth to Neshamas Chadoshes, which is technically, so in other words, even if a father and mother are bonded completely, but if they're not going to be together physically, where there's the actual union, one flesh, they're also not going to give birth. So you need both. You need their spiritual and psychological and intellectual, cognitive connection, and then you need their physical connection, informed by that higher level, and that gives birth not just to neshamas, but neshamas chadoshes. And he calls that shezeu hamshacha atzmis. So I think zun is the hamshacha atzmis, and the neshamas zun. I think hamshacha atzmis can refer to zun, or it can refer to neshamas chadoshes. Not positive, or it could be referring to the whole union altogether. But generally speaking, Chachma and Bina is like a teacher and a student could also have Chachma and Bina. But when you want Hamshach Atzmis of actually giving birth to someone, to a child, that's Atzmis, you need to have much more than that. And I think that's what he means here by Hamshach Atzmis and Malchus. Now, in Geras HaKedesh Siman Chof, he says that Dafka Malchus, Dafka the mother in the womb, gives birth to a child. Just like a seed on a table is not going to blossom into a plant. It has to be in the ground. The ground is an example for Malchus, for Malchus. So it could be that, in other words, the Mochin is the preparation, and it's actually happening in Malchus, and that's where the Neshamas Chadoshes are born. There may be more information on this as we learn further, but I believe that satisfies and explains this. But yeah. Okay.
Could you define the difference between Avodah and Zun? They have the same mission. I know this is Mochin.
I'm not going to repeat. I just explained it for 10 minutes. What should I tell you?
No, I know you didn't hear my question. I heard your wonderful explanation. Why is this called Avodah, and why is Zun not called Avodah? Zun are also Avodah. The only thinking, this is Mochin, this is Midas, but why?
Because Avodah clearly applies to Mochin. That's where he applies to Chachma and Bina. I don't have any better thing. I don't know. I can't answer that question.
The real Avodah is from Zoh Malchus, Zun. So that should be.
But as he makes it very clear, if the parents are not united intellectually and emotionally on a level on that level, they will not be able to give birth in general, especially new neshamas. I don't know why. I mean, that you have to look up. Is there a reason why that's the case? From Tanya, it appears that because Chachma and Bina is the beginning of everything. Everything starts from giving birth to emotions. If there's no emotions, then there's no Zoh and Malchus. So if there's no emotions, so you first have to give birth to basically the father and mother in Mochin have to give birth to the father and mother in emotions.
Okay, so both of them are really connected. The process works like this. It's like one thing, and the process is first Avodah, then Avodah is becoming Zun. Okay, it's a new thing. I didn't think about it, but makes sense.
As I said, there may be more about this in Chassidus. I'd have to look it up. I don't remember now, but it's an interesting conversation. And in Eitz Chaim, it's very clear. He says that de yichud pnimi da'avah noisen. That's the words he uses. He says those words. He says loses meichin gmurim the Gadlus el zun datzilis lehelid neshamas chadoshes. Well, on a very basic level. Listen, let me put it this way. On a very basic level, if you have a husband and wife joined together, they can give birth to a child. But if they don't have their Mochin in the right place, the right kavonis, it's not going to be neshamas chadoshes. You need a full yichud pnimi of Abba ve'ima, that full Mochin. And remember, the tipus moyach ha'av is where the child comes from, but it also comes from the moyach ha'em. So you need to have both Mochin, the chachma and bina and the das that give birth to that emotional love that connects Zah Malchus, which will in turn give birth to neshamas chadoshes. Yeah, look, this is common discussion that Nasilus Chabad gives birth to Chagas and Nihim, which in turn give birth to Bria and the next world. That's the general discussion. If you only have Chabad, you're not going to have the Olam HaBria. If you're only going to have Chagas and Nihim, you're not going to have the full intensity of Chabad. So that's in general, that says everywhere. But here he's going down, breaking it more into detail. But look at the next line now. Now he continues and says.
That's very interesting. That means be'etzem that Avo and Zun are one entity, but this is a process. You have to have Avo, then you could have the Zun in a proper way, then you have Olam HaBria.
Yeah, it has to be deliberate. Like I said, you could have a husband and wife connect with each other purely biologically without any kavanas, without Mochin even. But that's not ultimately, that's definitely not zivug shlim. Now he says like this. Any other questions? Anybody want to ask anything else? Okay. So now he continues. The tachlis hakavona, and the ultimate purpose liyasam shocheh b'chinas malchus dafke, is that the transmission should be dafke and malchus. It's not enough to remain on the higher levels, it has to come down to malchus. Remember on the top of page 1247, he said it's not enough just to have ava, kedish be'esh, kaleis hanefesh. It has to come down by ava b'tanugim into esek haTorah mitzvos in shuv lasses l'izber dirbe tachtenim. And so in other words, all this that we talked about, the elevation, that the midas elevate the Mochin, bina to chachma, and they're gazing at arich, and it's drawing from atik. Now the kavanah is to come back into Zoh, and ultimately the ultimate purpose is in Malchus. And now he's going to explain what that means. So he says, V'hu inyan, and now he's introducing another pasuk. This is a pasuk, I believe, from Shir HaShirim.
What's the first word on the line, Rabbi? I'm not finding it yet.
Chinas Malchus dafke.
Chinas.
So now he's going to introduce a pasuk from Shir HaShirim.
Right? Now you're back.
Reish Mem Ches, Aleph Reish Mem Ches, 1248. V'hu inyan ha'torah she'otra lo imay b'yem chasen nosei dafke. So the pasuk says, is talking about the day of the chasana of a bride and groom, and the mother of the bride, I believe, weaves a crown, like a queenly crown. Well, actually, Shatara Loi. So it must be, I don't know if it's the mother. The mother crafts a crown for him. Loi would mean him would be the chassan probably. The
mother is putting the crown on the chassan. The
crown that the mother places, but itra also doesn't just mean place. I think it also means to weave, to create, or craft.
No, itra means it's a Torah. It's a crown. She, in Pashtus, I don't know.
Hold on a second. 1 second. I think he brings this on the first page of Ayin Beis. 1 second. Oh, kosher lahem shnei kasarim. Okay. For some reason I remember it. 1 second. Okay. Yeah. So what we see from this is that there's a chasana.
The thing that
There's
he
a
said
mother
just
level of
now,
the
he's
mother.
saying clearly.
One second. I'm going to explain. 1 second. Let me teach it, and then we'll stop for questions or comments. So there's a chasana, there's a mother, and there's placing a crown on the head of in the day of the wedding. What does this mean in Ruchnius? It says the hamshacha bezah hilitzerech hamalchus dafke. So the hamshacha in zah is the chassan, ima is chachma, is bina, and bina is placing a crown on zah, but when? For the purpose of Malchus, of the chasana, not just regularly. So in other words, the kavanah is dafke and Malchus. When the chassan meets the kala and the Malchus, which is their marriage. What does this mean? He says, "Hu inyan hamshachas ha'er ba'halachas the Torah shebal peh." Canal, like we said before with Rabbi, that this is drawing down the oil in the halachas of Torah shebal peh. Halacha is ma'aseh b'peil, but it's informed by a reason. It could be a reason Mochin shayach lemidas, or it could be a reason like Gadlus, the hidden, deeper dimension. The Malchus peh, Torah shebal peh karinun lo. We say in Tikkun Ezer, Pasuk Eliyahu, that Malchus is like, why is it called peh? Because Torah shebal peh karin, you call Torah shebal peh. It's the mouth. So Malchus is the level of peh, bal peh. So Malchus, therefore, is Torah shebal peh. And when you draw down the oyer from the higher levels, not just from Zah, all the way from Ima and Gadlus Abba and Mochin, that goes into Malchus. That's the kavanah. I'm going to explain this more, but let me just read inside till the end here. Look in the mimer that begins v'chol banayich. Not sure which mimer this means. It could be chol banayich is in Lekutei Torah. Is there a mimer called banayich? I don't remember. Or Torah. I have to look up which mimer this is. And what does he say there? The mamshichusa, the mecha ilos, the ma nimshach, the mimshichusa, the mecha ilos, the ma nimshach b'chinas atorah the gvura mokar ter shabal peh. That from the level of mecha ilos, the ma, which is all the way in arich, the highest level arich. From there, nimshach is drawn b'chinas atorah de gvura. Atorah is just Aramaic for the crown of gvura, which is moker Torah shebal peh, the source of Torah shebal peh, which is Malchus. So basically, he's bringing from there proof this idea that the kavanah dafke tachas hakavanah is to bring it into Malchus, but coming from the highest levels. U'moichi lo stima. What is this level called? Moichi lo stima. The supernal mind that conceal the hidden moichi lo. Hubchinis moiche da'atika. I said arich, not even higher. Moiche da'atika. That's the moich of atik. U'kamoshin is bar le'il, as we was learned earlier. Where in volume 1, dibra maskal ha'oisa sukose, the dibra maskal halalu Hashem. This is all back in volume 1, where he talked about the 2 levels of chachma stima, and he said there that the higher level is moiche da'atika. So what do you see from this? That in all the way in Torah shebal peh, in Malchus is being drawn from the highest levels of Mochin, all the way Moiche avat atik. Malchus Torah shebal peh. And from there comes Amshach Malchus Torah shebal peh, the actual halachas. So when you look ostensibly at a halacha, you could see some of the reason, but when you're able to be like Rabbi, through his B'chol Ma'idecha, he was through his B'chat Katirnis Katan, was able to reveal these highest levels, the deepest secrets, and the hidden secrets from Atik being drawn all the way into the halachas of Torah shebal peh of Malchus. And that's the meaning. Remember, Yem Chasanasi. Yom Chasanase is Matan Torah. The Mishnah says. Ukamoi Kain, and similarly, this is Torah. That you're drawing it into Torah, Shabbat Peh. Ukamoi Kain b'kiyam mitzvos b'poel mamish b'kabola sel malchus shamayim. And so too, this informs the performance of Torah and mitzvos, in actual Torah and mitzvos, done b'kabola sel malchus shamayim, driven by the yoke of heaven. And now he connects us back to the top of page 1247, Tanya, chapter 50. Shezeu b'chinas hashuv. This is the shuv after the rotze. Ava b'chol meidecha is a rotze. It's going upward. You're being elevated and gazing at arich and atik and elevating it to the highest levels. Remember, the midas, as he said in the beginning of the paragraph, elevate and raise the Mochin upward. But that's not the kavanah. The kavanah is that it should come down into midas and primarily into Malchus. And not just in Torah Shabbat Peh, but also in Torah Mitzvos. He says, so that's the shuv that comes after the Rotzeh Hanal, after the yearning and the longing. To draw down the revelation of the infinite light below, there should be a home for God in the lowest of worlds. Like he writes in Tanya, the end of chapter 50, canal, like discussed above at the top of page 1247. So here you have the whole picture coming together. The elevation and drawing it back down all the way into Malchus, to Dira B'Tachtenim, Torah Shabbat Peh, and all the way to Dira B'Tachtenim. Torah Shabbat sometimes is compared to Chochmah, and Torah Shabbat Peh to Malchus. So Chochmah and Bina are more connected to Torah Shabbat. He doesn't say this explicitly here. But Torah Shabbat Peh is where it comes. Remember, you can't have Torah Shabbat without Torah Shabbat Peh because you don't know how to practically implement Torah Shabbat without knowing the halachas of how it translates into real halacha. So that's Malchus and Torah Shabbat Peh in Torah, all the way to actual performance of Torah mitzvahs, of mitzvahs, the Kabbalah Sal Malchus Shemayim. For who Inyan? I'm going to read till the end of the paragraph and then we'll discuss. In Parsha Shlach, the story of the Meraglim, it says, Va'ata Yigdol no koyach na'adnai. That the power of Adnai, the power of godliness, becomes strengthened and elevated. What is this? What is that? Hagdolas hakoyach shu amshochet b'chinas atzmus ein sof b'malchus al yidei mitzvos. What do you mean Yigdol koyach Adnai? The Eibush is powerful. Why suddenly now did it become more powerful? Because the power is by drawing down b'chinas ha'atzmus in malchus through mitzvahs. U'kamosh kosav b'lekutei Torah al pasuk zeh. Like a Lekutei Torah Shlach, he explains this in that way. So when the Kolav and Yeshua and the representing God came and reprimanded and contradicted the complaint of the Meraglim, so ultimately their work ultimately created a greatness in Koyach Adnai, in the power of God. The ability to go ahead and enter the land of Israel. The Meraglim said that he does not have koyach. Because it's Eretz Eicheles Yeshver, it's a land that consumes its inhabitants. And even though God said they should go, the Meraglim challenged that. And the fact that was negated strengthened God's power. That means through the going into Eretz Yisrael and the mitzvahs that are done in Eretz Yisrael, as explains there, in Lekutei Torah, that creates a greater strength in Koyach Adnai, Agdolas HaKoyach. So does this refer to how the Koyach probably refers to the Koyach of Eretz Yisrael as Malchus? Not sure. Is this because on one hand, Agdolas HaKoyach sounds like that it causes the you're drawing the Mochin into, because yes, the Koyches Atzmim, for sure. The Koyches Atzmim from the higher levels are being drawn into Malchus, and that's the Yigdol no Koyach Adnai. Yeah. Okay. Now, let's stop here. Any questions?
Yes, Rabbi Jacobson, the drawing down of Zah into Malchus. We had an elaborate discussion. The Rebbe gave an elaborate discussion how Chacham Bina can elevate through the midos, through Zah, up to the highest levels of Tika and Arich, and then coming down. When it says here this relatively brief discussion about how we bring that into Malchus of Atzilus, and then it says at the end, Al Yidei Mitzvos. How's it done? Well, what mitzvahs are there? There's no human beings there doing mitzvahs in Atzilus. I mean, if you're talking about on lower levels of Olam Asiyah, I can understand. But I think, someone. But how is that actually happening? How is Zah bringing this incredible Chacham Bina has gone up, stared at the Metzach, brought down the highest levels of Yuchud and this new ore that comes down through that union up there at the highest levels, brings it down, gives it back to Zah, so to speak, I would assume, because it's going to ultimately be transferred into Malchus through Zah, this incredible light, this new light, new or Neshama Chadasha. How is that Zah actually going into Malchus? And he says they're mitzvahs. I don't know how all mitzvahs is Olam Asiyah Gashmi. I don't understand that connection. How Zah brings it into Malchus through mitzvahs.
Well, this is just the basic. Wherever you learn Chassidus, that it talks that when you do a certain thing below, it generates something above. It's the same principle. When a husband and wife in Kedusha, in a holy, sacred way, join together, we say it's a manifestation of Zah and Malchus coming together. Now, obviously, husband and wife are physical human beings. But as we learn in Chumash, Zachar and Nekeva, male and female, he created them, but Tselem Elokim. What's the Tselem Elokim of a man and woman? That is Zah and Malchus. So hold on, let me just finish. So when we talk in Chassidus, talks about, for example, Shabbos is Malchus. 6 days of the week is Chesed, Gvura, Teferes, Netzach. What does it mean? It's trying to help us understand that the things in the physical world are nishtal shalom mehen, they evolve from the spiritual. So when we do something in the physical, when you, for example, take and light a candle, you're being mamshech from Gvura of Atzilus. When you're drawing water, you're being mamshech from Chesed and Atzilus. In the physical world, that's how it manifests. We want to align the physical with the spiritual. He's not spelling this out here because this is like a given, that whenever you talk about anything in the material world, you're talking about the equivalent, kegavna, like we say, al metatol, al meilah. It corresponds. So both our Avodah draw those levels, and those levels are the root of all the structures that we identify with. So if you were to say, what's the mocker of Torah Shebal Peh? The Torah Shebal Peh, when we learn Mishnah and Gemara in oral Torah, the mocker is Malchus of Atzilus. What's the mocker of Torah Shebiksav? Is higher levels. It could be Zah, it could be Mochin. And the same thing with everything. Shabbos, the mocker is Malchus. So you have everything as a mocker. So he's talking about it all intertwined here, that the ultimate kavana is to bring it down Dira B'Tachtein. And what does that mean in the spheres of Atzilus? It means not to stay in Atik, Arich, and Mochin the Gadlus and Zah, but all the way to come down into Malchus. That's the equivalent, what we would say, don't just learn Torah and contemplate and even feel it, but you have to go out and do a mitzvah. You have to actually implement it and make Dira B'Tachtein. Is that clear?
Yeah, but when a person speaks Torah, because you don't makam the mitzvah of Talmud Torah unless you speak it. So I can understand that in this olamas asiyah hagashmi. So what, if I understand you correctly, you're saying that in order for this union of Zah and Malchus to happen, that's bringing down this new light, it is dependent on our actions in Olam Asiyah. It can't be done in just the spiritual worlds. It requires the lowest level.
That's not what I was saying, by the way.
No?
That's not what I said.
So then
That's not what I said. I said whatever is happening down below, we have a mind, we have emotions, and we have actions. And just as it is in the physical world, that's not just enough to contemplate on God, but has to come into feelings. And it's not enough feelings, but has to come into action, into Torah Shebal Peh and halachas and Torah Mitzvos B'Poel. That reflects how it is in Atzilus as well. That not just Atik and Arich and Mochin and Midas has to come into Malchus. That's what I said.
So in order to have Zah bring into
Well,
Malchus...
one second, I'm not clear. What?
Oh,
let me ask you a question. When we say that we were created b'Tselem Elokim, Tselem Elokim is not physical. It's a spiritual Adam Elyon that the male and female reflect two dimensions in godliness. So when a husband and wife join together and they're intimate, how do you explain? Zah and Malchus don't join together physically, but it's reflective of the spiritual union of Zah and Malchus. So both Zah and Malchus is the root of our male and female, and the male and female union generates energy in Zah and Malchus. So we're talking here, the realities on earth reflect the realities above and vice versa.
So, but the reality
I'm not
above...
sure where was the disconnect here. What?
Reality, that's a little... Yes, I do have...
You know what, listen, because there are other people in this class,
Okay.
so let's leave it off. You
Okay.
can ask me privately, because I don't want to be like this. I mean, not everybody necessarily has this issue. So
Okay.
let's
Fine.
move on. Are there any other questions? Okay. So as I said, yes, I'll be happy to explain it, but I think we're going here, not sure what's going on. So we'll talk about it afterwards. Okay. So now we've established that this highest level of B'chol Moedecha, which elevates the mind to the deepest levels of the divine, but ultimately the kavanah is that it should come downward and it should infuse Zah and Malchus all the way. In Avodah, that means Dira b'tachtenim, Torah Mitzvos, and in Torah it's Torah Shebal Peh, which is Peh Malchus. Okay. So now I'll continue reading. V'hine Yedua. Now it's known. The b'chinas Mochin the Gadlus Hanal, that this Mochin the Gadlus that we've been discussing, this mature mind, that's the primary thing that we draw down and create and generate through our Avodah. So in the Maimer, back in volume 2, it was discussed there. Yeah. And it's explained elsewhere, but at length, what is written in the writings of the Arizal, that tachlis havedi lahamshich mochin lezun, that the ultimate purpose of our Avodah is to draw Mochin into Zun. So here he clearly is discussing now how these levels are being generated and initiated through our Avodah. So first of all, Mochin the Gadlus, and elsewhere at length, how the ultimate Avodah is to draw Mochin into Zah and Malchus. For haloi, al pisei the ishtalshalus, gamkin mishachem mechel in Zun. The Rebbe Rashab is asking, isn't it a fact that even without Avodah, according to the very order of Seder Ishtalshalus, even if you have no Avodah, you also draw down Mochin into Zun, into Zah and Malchus. So if that's the case, what exactly is new, is being innovated in the drawing of Mochin that comes through Avodah? When you think of Seder Ishtalshalus, The Eibishter created the cosmic order in a fashion. Let's say Atzilus. There's Chochma, Bina, Das, Mochin. There's Midas. The Mochin are drawn into the Midas in the process of creation. But then the Arizal says that's the Tachlis Avodah is to draw down Mochin into Zun. So what exactly is the Chiddush that the Avodah does that's not there on its own? It's like saying God created a world. There's Daimim Tzameach Chaim Medaber. Can everybody mute? Because
that's Shlomo. He keeps the Hebrew name keeps going off every other second.
Okay. So God created existence. It has divine energy in it. So what is achieved through Avodah? The Avodah of Hamshachas Meichel in the Midas. That's the question that he's asking. Acha inyan hu. The answer is, the inyan in this is, the Mochin, the Seder Shtalshus and B'chinas Chitzenius HaMochin. The Mochin, the level of intellect invested in creation of existence, like the artist using his mind to create a beautiful art, is only Chitzenius HaMochin. It's only the outer dimension of his mind. Ubederach klal hu b'chinas Mochin di Yanika. And in general, this is the level of Mochin of Yanika, like we learned before, Yanika Iber Yanika Mochin. It's Mochin di Yanika means Mochin of nursing, the nursing stage. It's only a very limited flow. B'chinas Mochin di Ima. This is called Mochin of Bina, Ima. V'hainu mashanihi di Ima nasim Mochin lazah. This is what in Kabbalah it says, that the lower level of Nihi, Netzach Yisay, the lower level of Bina, becomes the intellect of the Midas. That's how Bina relates to the Midas Chitzenius HaMech. That's from the outer union of Chachma and Bina, not an internal Zivug Shlim. Shehen Yisrael Saba V'Tfuna. That's a level called in Kabbalah Yisrael Saba V'Tfuna. It means literally Israel Saba is a level of the grandfather, which means a higher level of sagacity or sagacity. I don't know how you pronounce it. And Tfuna is Bina, the lower level of Bina. I'm not going to go into the details. Yisrael Saba Tfuna is basically Chitzenius HaMech, the Yichud Chitzeni of Abba V'Imi, Yisrael Saba Tfuna. And this Yichud, this union, Taka, doesn't happen through our effort. That happens on its own. That's what God implanted, an automatic system in Seder Shtalshus to have this level. So Zoh is getting level from Mochin, Seder Shtalshus, Chitzenius HaMech. U'kamashakosah b'Priyetz Chaim ba'Agdoma, like he says in Priyetz Chaim, another sefer from Narizal, in the introduction, Ubeshara Krishma Perikei. And in Priyetz Chaim, the section on Krishma, chapter 5. So the Etzem Gilui is done by its own. The only thing is, our Avodah is to draw that Gilui, like he says there at the end of chapter 5. But the Avodah doesn't create the Gilui. It's part of the process. It just draws it into us. The primary Avodah that we do is not Chitzenius HaMech, it's Mochin the Gadlus. It's the mature mind. This transmission is not in the cosmic order on its own, in the structure of its own. Which was already pre-measured according to the Maimer Kavamida, according to the instructions. The Kavamida is the measuring rod that God measured a certain amount of energy that he plants into existence. Now we're talking that the primary Avodah is to draw Mochin the Gadlus, not just to reveal the energy that's in existence. This rather, next page, 1249. This is not what was measured already. This is to draw a new Hamshacha from a place that's higher than Seder Shtalshus, the core of Ein Sof. And this we draw down dafka through the Avodah Mesiras Nefesh, which is B'chol Me'edecha, K'meshekasa Ba'abir Divinigdashti, like he explains in the Bia V'Nigdashti, which was already referred to on page 1236, where he talks about Yichud Abba Ve'ima, that is drawing from a deeper place. That means that through the work in the inner and core of the soul, you in turn draw from the inner and core of Ein Sof higher than Seder Ishtalshus. This is the love b'chol meidecha with all of you. Hanal, the higher level, this ava b'chol meidecha, our work of this tremendous love, that we become completely attached, completely connected, and consumed by godliness. Dafka through that, we're mamshech gmeichin the Gadlus. We elevate bina to the higher level, and we draw down that not just the minimal amount of moichin, just to keep the machine working, existence in place, but actually a higher, deeper dimension, which is called moichin the Gadlus. And here I'm going to stop here for this class, to the top of page 1249. So you see how he's bringing it all back together, and now he's clearly talking about how what Avodah accomplishes and what it doesn't accomplish. Maybe that answers your question that you were trying to get at. Maybe not. I'm not sure.
That was exactly my question, Rabbi. That was my question. I didn't present it properly. I explained it properly, but that was my question. It seems like there's two tracks here. There's one that's, as you said, just keeps it in play automatically. God's creations, his Seder Shtalshlus is already doing that.
Okay, great. So then the Rebbe, so you anticipated what he was going to say. Good.
Sure, yeah. Thank you.
Okay, I'm glad that was cleared up. Okay, I'm going to stop here. Does anyone have any questions?
Yeah, can you just explain what a neshama chadasha means? Because is it that where we normally use it, like you said, the Alter Rebbe? Is it being used differently?
He's not talking about the Alter Rebbe necessarily. He's talking
I mean, like that type,
He's talking about a new revelation that was not here before. You're not revealing something that's already in existence, like we just read right now. There is energy in this world that you can reveal, and there's new energy that you can generate. So the highest levels of zivug generate a completely new energy. That's what neshamas chadashus means.
Oh, great! Thank you. I've been thinking
now,
that.
In the case of in actual neshamas, the Alter Rebbe is an example of that, who actually came. But it really means a new, unprecedented energy that was not there in the package already. Like, for example, it says there'll be all kinds of new neshamas. God made a plan, created neshamas to fulfill that plan. But those neshamas are in place. Now they have to actualize their work. And then there's drawing neshamas chadashas, or higher levels of energy that are, okay.